Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This morning, continuing my free agency reaction videos, and I decided to start off this morning by talking about a team that I really like what they're doing, in contrast to ending off last night with a team that I absolutely hate what they're doing. We're going to talk about the Portland Trailblazers. I think they've done a great job in the transaction period so far, both with the Robert Covington trade and the signings they've made. So, I want to spotlight that and I guess compliment them on some moves well done. But before I get too far into that, I want to remind you to leave a like and subscribe. I've been appreciating all the support I've been receiving lately, and I hope to see that continue. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. So, the Blazers offseason really started on, what was it, Monday night? Yeah, Monday night when they made the Robert Covington trade, gave up the 16th overall pick and a protected 2021 first in exchange for Robert Covington. They also had to give up Trevor Ariza in that deal. I love that deal. I gave them a A- in that deal because I think that Robert Covington is a perfect fit for their roster. They like to run the drop coverage scheme on the defensive end of the floor with their big guy Yusuf Nurkic, and now their backup big man Enes Kanter has to play in a drop back scheme as well. So having a player that is a wing defender who is super rangy, can play super well off the ball and create a big impact is going to make a big deal. Also, I had to put the Dame jersey on. Who doesn't have a Dame jersey? Everybody loves Dame. But Covington, in my opinion, was a great addition because he fits their defensive scheme perfectly. On the offensive end, he's going to be able to space the floor for Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, and that is super, super valuable for this team. The defense is really what I keep coming back to. Zach Collins was pretty much the guy who played that rover role of rotating off the ball and picking up some really key off-ball blocks and steals, creating those transition opportunities. And Robert Covington is clearly a better player than Zach Collins. He has the more consistent jump shot, and he's a much better defensive player at this point as well. So this is a perfect scheme fit. Covington is going to come in and make this team markedly better, and I think that with him, along with their free agency additions, it made this team a lot better. Derrick Jones Jr. was the guy that they brought in who wasn't on this roster before, Rodney Hood. Had a player option that he declined, but the Blazers did bring him back on a bit steeper of a cost, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, how did this guy get a $6 million deal last season and then a $10 million deal this season when the cap is basically the same? And he played the whole season with, or he didn't play the whole season with a torn Achilles, if I'm not mistaken. So, how did he increase his value? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but it happened, and it was very important for them to keep Hood around. He's really their scoring wing off the bench. Gary Trent has taken on a lot of that same role, but in the playoffs, he was expected to also take on some important defensive matchups, and that really hurt his shooting efficiency, and he ended up shooting the ball at a much more human rate instead of the 50+% he shot throughout the seeding games. So Rodney Hood is going to be able to come in and take some of that offensive burden off of Gary Trent when he's out there with the second unit. This team needed to add wing help, and they certainly did. Hood's defense isn't as good as a guy like Covington or a guy like Derrick Jones Jr., but he is super valuable to them on the offensive end of the floor, going to space the floor out for the guards, and he also has some off-the-bounce creation type stuff that he can do. Everyone remembers the Rodney Hood game where he came off the bench in the second overtime and lit the Nuggets on fire. It was a big reason why the Blazers were able to come away with that Western Conference semifinals series win and get them to the Western Conference Finals. So keeping him around was really important, and it really just bolsters this rotation and continues to make it better. He's one of the better sixth men in the NBA. I think that his offensive value is super underrated, and he's going to make this team a whole lot better than they were without him. I think that this was a super important re-signing. I think they might have overpaid a little bit, like I said. Don't know how his value increased when he didn't play the whole season. but it was important for them to keep him around, and maybe a bit of an overpay isn't the worst thing because, hey, they were still able to use their mid-level exception, and I think that they used it quite wisely on former Miami Heat wing Derrick Jones Jr. Jones is a super lengthy defensive player who needs to develop a jump shot on the offensive end, but is remarkably athletic, super lethal in transition, one of the better dunkers in the entire NBA, as we saw him win the slam dunk contest this past season, even though that was a bit of a scandal that he won it over Aaron Gordon. Nonetheless, this was a really, really nice signing for the Portland Trailblazers. He can also play that role of like a rover on the defensive end, that wing position who is responsible for covering a large portion of the court. Excellent team defender, great at helping off of his man, and also great at recovering to his guy. He is capable of getting some huge blocks and steals. We saw him make some huge plays for the Heat in the Bucks series. He didn't play much in the playoffs, but when he did, he made his minutes worth it by knocking down threes and making plays defensively. That's a super valuable skill set for the Trailblazers to add. Obviously, his three-point shooting does need to improve. I think he shot the three in the 20s last season, if not the very low 30s. So that's going to have to improve into the mid to high 30s if he's going to become a really effective starting caliber player. But nonetheless, this was a good signing for the Blazers. He's going to help them out on the defensive end, and if he can figure out the shooting, that's just another added plus. The second year, he has a player option, which isn't the best, but if he does opt into it, then they're going to have 2 years of a solid role player. I also think that they'll probably be able to re-sign him next season. Well, maybe not. I think that actually all of their guys are still under contract, but if he earns a significant pay raise, then maybe he will walk. But he's really going to help them this season, and when you have Damian Lillard in his prime, you have CJ McCollum in his prime, you have to do what you can to surround them with good complementary players that can help escalate your team to a championship level, and that's exactly what the Trailblazers have done here. They now have a rotation. I think that the starting lineup will probably be Dame, CJ, Rocco, Collins, and Nurkic. That's a lot of length in the front court and a lot of defensive talent there. I think that this will probably be the group that they trot out there because I don't think that they're going to start Derrick Jones Jr. He wasn't even a rotation player for the Heat, so I don't think that he will make the jump to starting over Zach Collins, who's a guy that the Trailblazers really believe in. Especially with the addition of Enes Kanter. Had they not signed Kanter, I would have thought that they could have brought Collins off the bench to function as a sort of third big man. But now that they have Kanter to play backup center minutes, Collins is going to be able to focus on playing the four a lot of the time. He's a really nice rim protector, and I think that he complements Robert Covington really, really well. That front court of Covington, Collins, and Nurkic is going to be devastating defensively, and it will really make up for some of the lackluster production that you get from Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum on that end of the floor. So that's really going to help out. I could see a case to start Derrick Jones Jr. over Zach Collins just because he's the more consistent defender, but in the end, I would prefer Collins since he's a better shooter, and if he can continue to develop that jump shot, it's just going to make his game all the more lethal as a floor spacer. You're going to have him and Covington in the two corners while Dame and CJ either ISO or run pick and roll with Jusuf Nurkic. And that pick and roll between Dame and Nurk was one of the more effective plays run in the NBA 2 seasons ago. So adding floor spacers like Covington and Hood is great for them. Off the bench, now you've probably got a unit of something like Anthony Simons, Gary Trent Jr., Rodney Hood, Derrick Jones Jr., and Enes Kanter. There's just the right amount of defense spaced out with offense from that unit. Gary Trent Jr. and Derrick Jones Jr. are both really solid defensive players. Jones is obviously better than Trent, but Trent fights hard on that end and does a good job of keeping his man in front of him. Obviously, guarding LeBron James was a bit too difficult of a task for Gary Trent, but he does fight hard and he is going to do what he's assigned to do. And coming off the bench, guarding bench players is going to be a lot easier of a role for him than guarding LeBron James, obviously. Rodney Hood is going to space the floor out for that second unit. Anthony Simons is a decent defender at the point of attack. He needs to improve there. But overall on offense, he needs to get better. He's super skilled, but he needs to knock down the three at a higher clip. He needs to improve his defense, and he needs to improve his decision-making on the offensive end of the floor so that he can be a more effective floor general off the bench. I'm not super sure that he'll be able to make that jump, and I think that the Portland should invest their biannual exception, which they are still able to use, on a better backup point guard option. Obviously, CJ McCollum can play a lot of backup point guard for you. Of course, he's not a backup because he starts, but if you're getting CJ out there for the 12, you're probably going to want Dame or CJ on the court at all times. So if you have CJ running the point for those, 12 to 14 minutes per game in the regular season that Dame isn't on the court, having a backup point guard isn't super important, but I just would like to have the option. And what other position are they going to use the biannual on? At the center position, they're set. They have Nurkic and Kanter. On the wings, this is one of the better wing groups in the entire NBA with Gary Trent, Robert Covington, Rodney Hood, Zach Collins, Derrick Jones Jr., even Nasir Little if he can take a step forward. So really, I think the point guard is the need that they need to address with this $3.6 million deal. Some names I have here are Brad Wanamaker, Raul Neto, Matthew Dellavedova, and Jeff Teague. Wanamaker, Neto, and Dellavedova are all defense-first minded point guards that are going to help out and make this team better defensively, which is really where they need to focus because, like I've said before, as hard as Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum work on defense, they are not plus defenders. So adding more players that can complement them, even if it's at their own position coming off the bench, is a good idea. I would prefer Wanamaker over the other two because I think that he has some value as a floor spacer and playmaker, but Neto would make sense because he's a better defensive player than Wanamaker, and obviously Matthew Dellavedova plays really hard, and everybody loves Delly, so I'd also consider him. Jeff Teague is getting up there in age, but I still think that he's a rotation-level player in the NBA, and if you can keep him around for either the minimum or the biannual, I think that it's a solid deal. He has a lot of experience and can be a good veteran to add to your locker room, and the value of those type of guys can never be understated. So, overall, in summary, I think that the Portland Trailblazers have done a great job in this transaction period. Trading for Robert Covington, signing Rodney Hood, signing Derrick Jones Jr., getting a trade for Enes Kanter where you ship out Mario Hezonja. All of these moves are really smart to me, and I think that they've become a significantly better team in this process. I would actually view this team as maybe the fourth best in the West at this point. I think that they're probably better than Golden State since Golden State has such a lack of depth. I think they're better than Utah, although that's a debatable one. I think they're obviously better than Houston, better than Oklahoma City now, obviously. So then it comes down to really 4 teams, or 5 teams that could be viewed as better than them. The 2 LA teams, Dallas, Utah, and Denver. When it comes to Denver, they have the best player out of this group in Nikola Jokic. They have the third best player in Jamal Murray. But I think that the Blazers have better depth at this point after adding all that wing depth that they have. So I think that I would maybe take Portland over Denver. When it comes to Utah, Dame is the best player out of anyone in that group, followed by Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. Depth-wise, that's a close one, but I think I would probably give the edge to Portland once again. The Los Angeles teams, I think you could make a debate that Portland is close to better than the Blazers or than the Clippers. I don't think that I would make that case, and I would probably take the Clippers still, but Portland has made themselves the third best roster in the Western Conference after being the 8th seed this past year. So I have a lot of high expectations for this team, and I think that they can get themselves back in the hunt for an NBA championship this season. Damian Lillard is going to be an MVP candidate in my mind. I think that there's a chance that he finishes in the top 3 this season. Everyone saw what he's capable of in the bubble. It's going to be a narrative that, hey, this guy really has just fought it out in Portland, and now they're finally at the level they need to be around him. I think this is clearly the best team Portland has had since LaMarcus Aldridge left, and maybe the best team they've had since Damian Lillard joined the roster. So I'm really happy with what this team did, and I think that they have definitely elevated their odds of winning a championship next season. I give them an A for this transaction period because I really love what they've done. Let me know in the comment section what you think. Do you like what the Blazers have done with their roster as much as I do? What do you think they should do with the biannual exception? Let me know. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. There will be plenty more where this came from. Lots more free agency coverage. I think I'm going to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves next, so that's going to be a bit more depressing. But hey, it is what it is, right? I think that's going to be it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you all again very soon.